Yes.
I'm going to do one more.
Sweet.
And people should sign up while I'm doing this. That's right there. I feel like I do this one like every week. But is Winston still here?
Yeah.
Your poem inspired me to do this poem, which I do every week. But just because you are here, this one is for you. It's called It Still Snows in Atlantis.
Woo!
And everybody's like, really? That's what you're going to do right now? At a time, I let my bathwater fill all the way up to my nose. I took it down in big gasps until my eyes went fuzzy and disappeared. I made waves of lukewarm murky water with my body, trying to keep myself sinking, trying to keep myself searching for a place outside of this cage of skin and bones where I could just float. A place where people wear their hearts on the outside and have real smiles that feel warm like the afternoon sun on my skin. But I never found Atlantis. Just cold bath water, a shivering body, and watery castles in my eyes, wandering too far into dark places before realizing I shouldn't have come alone. At that age, I was told often that I was a dreamer. And I was. I invented beautiful landscapes with people who lived in stained glass houses and spoke in lyrics and wanted nothing more than to see me succeed. But what kid wasn't? As a child, in Sunday school, a magician once told me that God is just like me. A dreamer, I thought, and then he repeated himself, God is just like you, kid. A clever thing to tell an 8-year-old as I pictured God sneaking chocolate chips to put on his peanut butter sandwich behind his mother's back and coloring outside of the lines. As I got older, the words changed and so did I. I made God into something that hurt. That concept still lingered in my mind. If God were like our parents, he'd have trouble sleeping at night worrying about bills. And sometimes he'd be short with his wife after a long day of work, even though she's the only one he'd cry to. And if God were anything like me, he'd write poetry on his lunch break, sing songs too loud he doesn't know all the lyrics to, and he'd be scared for a generation of kids being parented by drug use. And sometimes he'd feel hopeless. But if God were to actually step inside of my worn-out thrift store shoes, he'd put his foot in his mouth from the moment he said my love was unnatural, that I didn't deserve to lay next to my significant other, no matter their gray area gender, and stare so deeply in their eyes I find a better part of myself. And I'm happy. He'd take it back, because at most he'd realize all people will make mistakes, like the mistake God made the night he took you away from me. The feeling of abandonment growing in my stomach like the faint sound of falling rocks, wobbling on legs that suddenly felt like stilts on a tightrope, seeing my care for the world fade into a blur of indifference, pleading for a miracle when all I was seeing was a mistake. I hid under blankets of sheets for days, trying to drown myself back to Atlantis. I let my dreams dance on the inside of your embrace and tried to sleep forever. You were too young to go, and I was too young and scared to handle the grainy feeling of loss that was stuck in my skin. My mind was wrapped in a fog of memories of you that I suddenly realized could not be taken away from me. A jester's pocket clock swung in my heart, pendulum it towards beating. I stood up from the rubble. I shook out the dust. I plucked the power lines out of my broken sky and used them to lace myself back together. I pulled the skin around my mouth tight into a smile until I believed it. I found 10 different ways to sew you back into the hole in my chest. And I stopped being angry at God. And I started dreaming again. This time with full intentions of chasing them down, wrangling them into my arms like a loved one who had gone off to war, returning with eyes that reflected the faces of 14-year-old gunslingers, dreaming of my father's laugh that had been stolen by Afghanistan, and a broken heart. I never returned to his God, but I found religion in a sea of underground artists, lovers, dreamers, who wear their hearts on the outside and have real smiles that feel warm like the summer sun on my skin. And if you were to ask me who I think God is, I'd say she's a lot like a street poet, selling her words to a deaf society, just trying to make a difference.
Woo!